The rain was a cold, unforgiving sheet against the window of the cruiser. Detective Elias Thorne, 38, a man whose face had too many shadows for his age, took a slow drag from his lukewarm coffee. It was 2:17 a.m. in Blackwood County, a place where nothing of interest ever happened, and that was exactly the problem. "You're telling me this is the third time this month, Sergeant?" Thorne's voice was a low rasp, cutting through the static-laced police radio. Sergeant Kira Vance, a sharp, no-nonsense officer usually assigned to the day shift, leaned against the passenger door, her uniform pristine despite the miserable weather. "The fourth, Detective. The official report calls them unattended vehicular incidences. The unofficial word calls them ghost cars." Thorne grunted, wiping a condensation streak from the glass. "Spare me the local folklore, Vance. What's the common denominator?" "Zero." "That's the denominator," Vance said, opening the case file tablet. Each vehicle, a minivan, a sedan, a pickup, found perfectly centered on the shoulder of Route 31, always between the old Henderson farm and the Blackwood State Forest line. Keys in the ignition, sometimes music playing low, half-empty coffee cups still warm. But no passengers. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. And no footprints leading away. Maybe they just needed a quick hike in the woods? Thorne suggested, sarcasm heavy in his tone. Vance shook her head, her gaze fixed on the GPS map illuminating her face in a pale blue glow. "The first 2 times, we waited. 4 hours, then 6. No one returned. We pinged their phones, they're all either powered down or left inside the vehicle. The last one, a guy named David Cole, his phone was active. It showed him driving northbound on 31, then, nothing. The signal just flatlined right where we found the car." Thorne felt a familiar, unpleasant prickle at the back of his neck. This wasn't a standard missing person. This felt engineered, all right. "Where's the current scene?" "About 5 minutes out. We're responding to a 911 call from a truck driver who saw a parked vehicle with its hazards on. It's a late-model black SUV. The caller said he slowed down to check, and the driver's door was wide open. He swears he saw no one inside, but he heard a sound." "What sound?" Vance paused, looking genuinely unnerved. He described it as a faint, high-pitched ringing. He said it was like the quiet before an ambulance gets close, but it never gets louder. They pulled onto Route 31. The road was a slick, black ribbon cutting through an impossibly dense wall of trees. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, and the air was thick with the smell of wet pine and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ozone or fresh blood. Then, they saw it. The black SUV was an imposing, almost predatory silhouette against the weak wash of the cruiser's headlights. It was parked flawlessly on the gravel shoulder. The rear passenger window was intact, but the front driver's side door was indeed hanging open, swinging almost imperceptibly in the damp air. "Keep your flashlight steady, Vance. Let's process the vehicle first," Thorne ordered, gripping the cold metal of his service weapon, though he knew deep down this wasn't a job for a gun. As they approached, the ringing sound the truck driver had mentioned became audible. It was a subtle, crystalline noise, high above the register of the rain, seeming to emanate from the interior of the SUV. It wasn't the sound of an electrical fault or a phone. It was too pure, too sustained. Vance shone her light inside. The cabin was plush, expensive. On the passenger seat, Thorne saw a half-eaten bag of convenience store chips and a pair of reading glasses. "Look," Vance whispered, pointing her beam at the center console. Nestled in the cup holder was a smartphone. It was powered on, its screen glowing dimly. Thorne reached for it, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. As his fingers closed around the device, the high-pitched ringing stopped. A silence descended, absolute and crushing, far louder than the previous noise. On the phone screen, a single application was running. It wasn't a map or a social media feed. It was a rudimentary, black screen with a single line of text in stark white letters. blinking slowly, protocol, active. Thorne felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a ghost. This was an invitation, or perhaps, a warning. He looked up at the wall of the Blackwood State Forest, where the trees seemed to lean in, consuming the light. "Vance," he said, his voice barely a breath. "Run a trace on this phone. I want to know everything about the owner, who they called, and where this app came from. And Vance? Don't let anyone else touch this." He held the phone up to the weak glow of the dash lights, staring at the cryptic message. He knew one thing for certain: the missing people weren't lost. They had been taken. And whatever took them had left this behind, a calling card designed to lure in the people who investigate. The precinct office smelled of stale coffee, old paper, and a faint, lingering scent of antiseptic. Thorne sat hunched over a cheap metal desk in the cramped Major Crimes Annex, the mysterious smartphone resting on a disposable cloth mat before him. Sergeant Vance had managed to bypass the lock screen, revealing a life that seemed meticulously, almost aggressively, normal. The victim is Marcus Kane, 42. Software architect. Lives alone in the city, drives down to Blackwood every other weekend to visit his ailing mother, Vance reported, her fingers flying across a keyboard, cross-referencing databases. No criminal record. No debts. No known enemies. A blank slate. Thorne ignored the personal details, his attention fixed on the phone's glowing screen. "Focus on the anomaly, Vance. That app. Protocol, active. What is it?" Vance pulled up the phone's recent activity logs. It wasn't downloaded from any official app store. It was side-loaded 3 days ago, right before Kane went missing. The file name is a mess of alphanumeric code, X-77 beta-L6, but it only performs one function. When opened, it triggers that black screen and the ringing sound, and then, it uploads something. Uploads what? Where? That's the chilling part, Detective. The data packet is tiny, almost negligible, but it's transmitting to a ghost server. No IP address, no traceable location. It's bouncing off 3 different satellite proxies, all encrypted military grade, and then vanishing into a private dark web network that doesn't seem to have an entrance. Thorne picked up the phone again, the device feeling unnaturally cold in his gloved hand. He rotated it slowly. A high-level tech guy, clean life, gets targeted by a state-of-the-art data siphon. Why? What information could Marcus Kane possibly have that requires a black-budget level extraction team? "We ran a deep dive on his background," Vance said, minimizing a screen full of financial records. "Kane used to work for a company called Ether Dynamics about 10 years ago. They specialized in developing highly specialized, proprietary data encryption algorithms for government contractors. He signed a lifetime NDA when he left. Ether Dynamics." The name resonated like a muffled drumbeat. "Check their current and past government contracts, Vance. Focus on anything related to Blackwood County, Route 31, or deep forest surveillance," Thorne commanded. As Vance started a new search, Thorne noticed a detail on the phone's home screen he had missed earlier. Kane's background image wasn't a photo of his family or a landscape. It was a distorted, monochromatic picture of the Blackwood State Forest, the very woods near where his SUV was found, and in the center of the image, half hidden by shadow, was a crude, hand-drawn circle with a slash through it. "The anti-symbol," Thorne murmured, recalling the basic symbols used in certain subcultures to ward off perceived evil. Vance interrupted his thought, her voice tight. "Detective. I found something on Ether Dynamics. They had a massive, classified project 5 years ago. Code name, Echo Pact. The contract was to establish an experimental, long-range environmental monitoring system in the most isolated, seismically quiet region of the state. Guess where the proposed site was?" Thorne's eyes flickered to the map on the wall. "Route 31. The Blackwood Forest." "Exactly. But the project was officially scrapped 6 months in." Budget cuts, they claimed. The file states that all hardware was dismantled and removed. Vance paused, her face pale. Except, the manifest has a line item that was never signed off as returned, a single, high-frequency electromagnetic field generator. Theoretical range, up to 5 miles. Thorne stood, pushing his chair back with a scrape of metal. The metallic, sharp smell of ozone he had noticed at the scene flashed back to him. High-frequency electromagnetic fields. That crystalline, high-pitched ringing, the ringing wasn't static, Vance. It was the frequency, Thorne said, a horrible realization dawning. And the app isn't just uploading data. It's confirming a successful acquisition. The vehicles are bait. Kane was not taken for his data, he was taken because he knew the protocol, and they needed to silence the source. And the anomaly on Route 31 isn't a ghost car incident. It's a harvest. Thorne snatched his jacket. We need to get back out there, Vance. To the exact spot where we found the SUV. We're not looking for footprints leading away from the vehicle. We're looking for a signature, a residual trace of that field generator. This is a sanctioned snatch and grab disguised as a missing person case, and I want to know who is pulling the strings in that forest. Detective, wait, Vance called out, pointing to a new notification on her screen, the trace results for the other 3 missing people. The other 3 victims, the minivan driver, the sedan owner, the pickup guy, they all had something in common, too. They weren't tech guys, but every single one of them, 3 months ago, signed up for an experimental, high-speed regional internet service being piloted by a subsidiary of Ether Dynamics. They were all beta testers. Thorne stopped dead in his tracks. The rain had picked up again outside, drumming a morbid beat against the window. They weren't just targets, Vance. They were guinea pigs. They were exposed to something transmitted through that network. And when the payload activated, it took the user with it. He looked down at the X-77 Beta-L6 application on the screen. The letters protocol, active suddenly seemed less like a status and more like a dire countdown. The cruiser smelled sharply of ozone, even miles away from the scene. Detective Thorne and Sergeant Vance drove back to Route 31, this time armed not with standard police issue, but with a specialized kit Thorne had secured from the department's rarely used, decommissioned cold case unit, an antique, high-sensitivity frequency scanner and a handheld magnetometer. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the asphalt glossy and reflective under the pale, sickly moonlight. The black SUV is gone. Detective. Standard procedure. Towed to impound for forensic review, Vance noted, checking the GPS coordinates. We need to focus on this exact patch of gravel. The point of incidence. Thorne parked the cruiser across the shoulder, its headlights illuminating the precise area where Marcus Kane's car had sat. He grabbed the frequency scanner, a heavy, clunky device with a green, flickering CRT screen. This scanner is old, but reliable. If that electromagnetic field generator was active here, it should have left a unique thermal and frequency signature in the surrounding ground, like a scar, Thorne explained, stepping out into the damp AIR.as he walked slowly along the tree line. The scanner remained silent, only displaying ambient white noise. Frustration tightened the knot in his stomach. Nothing, Vance. Either the device was too shielded, or the rain washed away the trace. Vance, meanwhile, was using the magnetometer, a device that measures magnetic anomalies, to sweep the gravel shoulder. It was quiet too, until she reached a spot 3 feet behind where the SUV's rear tires would have been. The magnetometer began to whine softly, then escalated into a distinct, rhythmic pulse. Detective. I'm getting a reading, Vance called out, kneeling down. It's a localized magnetic spike. Not natural. It's too uniform, too manufactured. Thorne rushed over, peering at the device. The magnetic flux intensity reading was high, indicating a strong residual field, but what was truly disturbing was the pattern of the pulse, a short-long-short sequence repeating every 3 seconds. That's a signature, Vance. A specific, coded output, Thorne whispered, his eyes scanning the dense, black woods lining the shoulder. He then brought the old frequency scanner close to the spot. The green CRT screen instantly flared to life, not with a random wave, but a perfect, almost unnerving sine wave pattern. The device began emitting the same, almost musical, high-pitched ringing they had heard at the scene. It's the frequency. The same sound the truck driver heard. And the same frequency that app, the X-77 Beta-L6, was transmitting on, Thorne said, feeling the prickle of fear turn into cold certainty. The generator didn't just extract data. It created a temporary, localized nexus. A doorway. He pointed the scanner toward the woods, holding the antenna steady. The sine wave flattened almost immediately. Whatever it is, the field is contained to the immediate roadside. It's highly focused. Vance pointed to the pulsating magnetometer. The pattern, detective. Short long short. It's too deliberate. What if it's not just a signal, but a beacon? Or maybe, a timestamp? Thorne's mind raced. He thought about the 4 missing people, the perfect placement of their vehicles, and the vanishing signal of Marcus Kane's phone. Let's look at the ground closer, Thorne instructed. Using their powerful tactical lights, they examined the wet gravel. It was unremarkable until Thorne noticed something half buried in the soil right where the strongest magnetic spike registered. It was a perfectly cylindrical depression, about the size of a large paint can lid, surrounded by 4 smaller, shallow indentations, like something heavy had been lowered and secured there. This isn't a scar, Vance. It's a dock, Thorne stated, running a gloved finger over the rim of the indentation. Whatever apparatus generated that field, the Echo Pack technology, it was set up here, and then neatly removed. And they're coming back. He stood up and looked deep into the shadows of the forest. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and the silence had a predatory quality. They are using this spot to open a transient field, a localized singularity, to harvest the people they've exposed to their frequency through that ether dynamics beta program. But why? Why the effort? Why the secrecy? As if in response, the frequency scanner in Thorne's hands suddenly crackled, overriding the gentle ringing with a burst of distorted sound, too loud and too close. It wasn't human speech, but something digital and compressed. Then, through the static, a single, synthesized voice spoke, cold and mechanical. Access Protocol 7 to 9G has been detected. Authorized reboot required. The voice was clearly directed at their equipment. The shadowy organization was not just hiding, it was monitoring, Vance gasped, looking wildly around the woods. They know we're here, detective. They're tracking us through the scanner's output. Thorne slammed the scanner down onto the seat of the cruiser. Get us out of here, Vance. Now. As Vance slammed the door and spun the cruiser around, Thorne glanced back at the dark, silent spot on the roadside. The magnetometer, left behind in the rush, was still pulsing in the dirt, the short long short rhythm now faster, more frantic, but through the rear window, he saw something else, a tiny flicker of light, deep within the woods. It was a perfect, crystalline blue. And it was moving towards the roadside. Back in the fluorescent-lit sterility of the precinct, the sheer strangeness of the encounter on Route 31 felt less real, like a half-remembered nightmare. But the evidence was tangible, the encrypted phone, the cryptic app, and the recorded magnetic pulse data Sergeant Vance had managed to save before their equipment was compromised. Thorne knew he couldn't push this through official channels. Echo Pact and Ether Dynamics spelled government overreach and classification, and his job would be over before the report reached the chief's desk. He needed an insider. He found Professor Alastair Finch in his cluttered, windowless office at the university, tucked away beneath the physics department. Finch was an academic recluse, a specialist in unconventional telecommunications, and a former colleague of Thorne's during a brief, specialized task force Thorne had served on years ago. Finch, a thin man whose clothes always looked slightly too large, peered at the printout of the magnetic pulse signature with widening, apprehensive eyes. Short long short. Repeating, Finch mumbled, tapping a skeletal finger on the paper. That is not the signature of a sensor, Detective Thorne. That is the signature of a handshake. Elaborate, Alistair. You know what this is. Finch shifted nervously, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. I consulted for ether dynamics about 6 years ago, briefly. Before the Echo Pact project officially started. They were working on something truly revolutionary. Not just encryption, but data transfer on an unprecedented scale. They were trying to find a way to compress and transmit terabytes of raw sensory data, video, audio, even biological markers, almost instantaneously, across vast distances, using non-radio frequencies. Thorne leaned closer. And did they succeed? Finch lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Their theoretical framework was terrifyingly elegant. They hypothesized that by creating a localized, super-intense, high-frequency electromagnetic field, like the one that left this residual trace, they could briefly warp the fabric of the immediate local spacetime. Not enough to breach reality, but just enough to create a momentary, highly efficient channel. A digital wormhole. A wormhole? Thorne repeated, the word sounding absurd in the police station context. They were creating a transient teleportation device for data? For data, yes. The device on Route 31, the generator, was the transmitter. It creates the field. But the real breakthrough was the receptor. The human brain. Thorne froze. The missing people. The beta testers for the Internet service. The Internet service was a cover, Finch confirmed, his face pale. That experimental high-speed regional service was just a distribution vector for their true payload, a complex, resonant frequency, harmless to the body, that slowly calibrated the beta tester's bioelectrical field. It tuned the recipient's nervous system to the generator's signal. They were turning people into living hard drives, Thorne concluded grimly. Worse than that, Detective, Finch corrected, tracing the pulse pattern. The short-long-short pattern isn't just a handshake. It's a go signal. When the subject arrived at the nexus on Route 31, driven there by an implanted subconscious trigger, the X-77 Beta-L6 app, which they were programmed to open, confirmed their position. The generator activated, and the subject's entire consciousness, their memory, their personality, their living self, was compressed and instantaneously uploaded through that transient wormhole. Uploaded where, Alistair? Who is receiving this massive amount of human consciousness? Finch looked away, his eyes darting to the locked door. That's where I quit, Thorne. Their internal research logs, which I only saw a snippet of, referred to the receiving end as Project CHRYSALIS. The goal wasn't just data archiving. It was the construction of a self-sustaining, simulated ecosystem. A digital afterlife, or perhaps, a digital prison. He pushed the printout back toward Thorne. They took the first 3 as calibration tests. But Marcus Kane, the software architect, he was a risk. He worked on the core encryption. He was a targeted acquisition because he could dismantle their system. They didn't want his consciousness, they wanted to neutralize the threat by removing him from reality. Thorne gripped the edge of the desk. 4 people, vanished without a trace, their minds stolen, their bodies left somewhere unseen in the vastness of the Blackwood Forest. I need to know where Project CHRYSALIS is running, Alistair. The receiving end. The central server. Finch's face was etched with fear. The transfer is instantaneous, Thorne. The physical distance is irrelevant when you're bending spacetime. But there must be a point of maximum resonance. A constant, unmoving signature. Check the historical seismic activity logs for Blackwood County. The Echo Pact project required absolute seismic silence. If they built a facility, they built it where the ground is literally the most stable. Thorne stood up. He knew the department had those logs, filed away in the dusty basement archives. As he reached the door, Finch called out, his voice shaking. Thorne, one more thing. The blue light you saw? In the woods? It's not part of the generator. It's a byproduct of the consciousness transfer. When a subject is uploaded, the residual bioelectric energy converts to a high-purity, brief photon emission. They call it the ascension flash. Thorne nodded once, his jaw set. He had a location, a motive, and a name: Project CHRYSALIS. The conspiracy wasn't just hidden, it was a ghost in the machine, and he was the only one who could see the wiring. The basement of the Blackwood County Sheriff's Department was a cold, forgotten cavern of forgotten files and obsolete equipment. Thorne and Vance, utilizing the graveyard shift's solitude, had found the brittle, yellowed seismic activity maps dating back 30 years. Professor Finch was right, Thorne muttered, running his finger along a faded contour line on the map. They needed the quietest spot. Vance had cross-referenced the coordinates with modern satellite imaging. Blackwood County is generally seismically active due to the underlying shale formation. But there's an anomaly, a 9-square-mile pocket right in the heart of the state forest that shows 0 measurable microtremors for the past 20 years. The area was marked on the map simply as Sector 9, Restricted Timber Reserve, and its geographic coordinates were chillingly close to the section of Route 31 where the cars vanished. Why would a timber reserve be seismically dead? Vance asked, zooming in on the satellite image. The area was characterized by an unnaturally uniform, dense canopy, with no roads or trails visible, because they built something massive and deep there, Thorne answered, pulling up the echo-packed files Finch had hinted at. A facility that required absolute stability. A subterranean vault to house Project CHRYSALIS. They found a redacted environmental impact study from a decade ago concerning the restricted timber reserve. The public document claimed it was for protecting an endangered bat species. The classified annex, however, contained a survey report detailing the drilling of deep boreholes. Look at this, Vance pointed to a technical diagram. They drilled 4 boreholes down to the bedrock, each 300 feet deep. The report claims they were for geological sampling, but the schematics show heavy-duty concrete lining and steel reinforcement. And look at the spacing. The 4 boreholes were positioned precisely to create a large, perfect square. Their foundation points, Thorne realized, a cold dread settling in his stomach. The bedrock anchors. They built a structure, probably 5 or 6 stories deep, designed to absorb and neutralize all vibrational interference. That's why the area is seismically quiet. Vance checked her watch. It was 4 a.m. The sun was still hours away. If Project CHRYSALIS is down there, how do we find the entrance? They won't have a welcome mat. Thorne remembered Finch's frantic warning, the short pulse is a handshake. The magnetic signature left by the generator on Route 31 was a signal that he quickly booted up a computer and uploaded the specific frequency data of the magnetic pulse they had recorded. He then cross-referenced that pattern against all recorded military and private radio signals in the Blackwood County area. Going back 6 months, the search came back empty, until he broadened the parameters to include subaudible, low-frequency electromagnetic bursts. 1 hit. A continuous, cyclical, faint signal emanating from the center of Sector 9. The pattern wasn't the short pulse of the transmitter, but a deep, throbbing, short long pattern. This is the other side of the handshake, Thorne said, his voice quiet with intensity. The recipient's signal. The server is emitting a continuous, low-frequency pulse, a beacon, constantly listening for the generator's go signal from Route 31. This is Project CHRYSALIS talking. Vance printed the coordinates. It's about 8 miles off-road, deep inside the reserve. No easy access. We can't just drive in. We don't drive in, Vance. We move under the canopy. We go in light, and we go now. Before the day shift arrives and the rumors start flying about the 4 missing persons, Thorne decided, grabbing 2 sturdy tactical bags that he paused by the weapons cabinet, hesitating. A gun felt useless against a digital conspiracy. But a gut feeling, a cold, certain premonition, told him they weren't dealing only with code anymore. Finch had talked about. Ascension flashes, and Thorne couldn't shake the image of that moving blue light in the woods. That he grabbed 2 silenced sidearms and extra magazines. Vance, we're not cops right now. We're unauthorized intruders onto a Black Ops military science site. We are invisible until we get caught. No radio, no backup. Just us and this. He held up the coordinate printout. As they slipped out the back entrance of the precinct and into the chilling pre-dawn darkness, Thorne looked at the map. The facility was deep in the most restricted part of the forest, right beneath the Earth's most silent spot. It was the perfect place to build a digital prison for human consciousness. The moment they entered the tree line, they would be entering the silent, waiting territory of Project CHRYSALIS. The Blackwood State Forest, even in the dim pre-dawn light, was a suffocating maze. The dense canopy, primarily old-growth pine and cedar, blocked the weak moon and absorbed what little light the rising sun offered, plunging Sector 9 into a perpetual twilight. Thorne and Vance moved slowly, relying on a handheld military GPS unit set to the coordinates of the seismic dead zone. They moved like ghosts, their boots crunching softly on pine needles and moss. The air, it's different here, Vance whispered, pausing to adjust her pack. It's too still. No birds, no insects. It's unnaturally quiet. Thorne nodded grimly. The profound absence of natural sound was disturbing. The continuous, low-frequency electromagnetic pulse they had traced from the basement archive was likely responsible. It was subtle enough to evade detection but strong enough to disrupt the biorhythms of local wildlife. As they pressed deeper, the trees began to show subtle, unsettling signs of interference. The bark of some pines was unnaturally blackened and brittle, and the needles on certain branches were scorched and curled, as if exposed to sudden, intense heat, or high-frequency energy residual discharge, Thorne muttered, recalling the theoretical effects of the echo pack generator. We're getting close to the source of the magnetic field. The GPS indicated they were within a quarter-mile of the target coordinates. They reached a small, stagnant creek bed. As Vance stepped over a cluster of waterlogged roots, she stopped dead, freezing Thorne with a raised hand. Footprints, she mouthed. Thorne knelt. Imprinted in the slick mud by the creek bank were a set of fresh, deep boot prints. They weren't hiking boots, they were heavy, reinforced combat or tactical boots, and they were heading in the same direction as Thorne and Vance, single set. Moving fast and professionally. Not lumberjacks, Vance. Security detail, Thorne confirmed, drawing his silenced pistol and checking the chamber. They know the terrain. We need to stay off the ground level. They began to utilize the forest cover, moving from tree to tree, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows ahead. The air was now thick with the smell of wet earth and that sharp, metallic ozone. The low-frequency pulse, though still inaudible, was becoming palpable, a steady, internal pressure on their eardrums. Finally, the forest canopy thinned dramatically, opening into a large, circular clearing. The perimeter was lined with chain-link fencing topped with razor wire, easily 15 feet high. Warning signs, faded but legible, were staked every 30 feet, restricted government property. High voltage. Authorized personnel only. In the center of the clearing stood the facility. It was not a tall building. It was a massive, squat, concrete bunker, almost subterranean in appearance, with only 2 stories visible above ground. The windows were narrow slits of black glass, and the entire structure was utterly devoid of light and external activity. It looked more like a tomb than a research center. There were 2 sentry posts flanking the main double steel door, but they were currently unoccupied. Ghost shift, Vance noted, lowering her binoculars. They likely run on automated internal systems during the hours of 0200 to 0600. It's our window. Thorne spotted the entrance's weak point. 50 yards from the bunker, near the chain-link fence, was a utility junction box, shielded by an external metal housing. A faint, almost imperceptible plume of steam was rising from the housing, a sign of constant, heavy electrical draw. That box feeds the fence and likely the external sensors, Thorne deduced. If we can overload it, we might create a temporary gap in security protocols. And I think I know what caused that scorched earth and dead air." He directed Vance's attention to the roof of the concrete bunker. For massive ventilation shafts rose from the center, all pointing upward. But beneath each shaft, the asphalt on the roof showed severe cracking and discoloration. The 4 boreholes that anchored the structure, Vance realized. The shafts lead directly down to the lowest levels. They're venting the massive thermal discharge from the server banks of Project CHRYSALIS. Thorne's tactical mind took over. "We circle wide, stay under the cover of the tree line. Vance, I need you to create a controlled short in that junction box. Disable the perimeter fence and the ground pressure sensors immediately surrounding the bunker. I'll approach the main entrance." As Vance moved silently toward the fence, Thorne began his infiltration. He moved along the edge of the clearing, hugging the shadows that he was 10 feet from the bunker wall when a deep, metallic clunk echoed from within the concrete structure. The enormous steel door, previously sealed and inert, began to slowly, hydraulically slide open, revealing a black, cavernous reception area. Thorne froze, melting into the shadows. He hadn't touched the door, and Vance was still a distance away from the junction box. The door was opening on its own. A moment later, a figure emerged from the depths of the facility and stepped into the clearing. It was a woman in a standard, slate-gray ether dynamics uniform, but her movements were jerky, unnatural, and her eyes were wide and milky white, staring blankly into the forest. She was carrying a black duffel bag in one hand, and in the other, a deactivated, high-frequency electromagnetic field generator, the same type used on Route 31. Then, she stopped, dropped the duffel bag, and raised the generator toward the dark forest. A faint, crystalline blue light, the ascension flash, flickered into existence behind her milky eyes. The generator whined, charging up. She didn't look at Thorne. She looked past him, into the deeper woods. And she spoke, her voice flat and synthesized, echoing the computerized voice they'd heard on the scanner. "Protocol, CHRYSALIS. Subject initiation pending. Stand by for upload." Thorne realized with a sickening jolt of horror that the woman wasn't guarding the facility. She was another victim, activated remotely, and positioned as a transmitter. And she was pointing the live generator directly at the most logical approach vector for any unwanted visitors. She was pointing it straight at Vance. Thorne's tactical training immediately kicked in, overriding the surge of adrenaline. The woman in the gray uniform, eyes milky and holding the powered-up electromagnetic generator like a weapon, was a tragic casualty of Project CHRYSALIS. She was no longer an individual, she was an automated drone, a remote extension of the facility's defense system. Vance was still moving toward the junction box, her back to the facility, unaware of the immediate threat. Thorne dropped to a crouch, his focus laser-sharp. He couldn't risk a shot that might hit the generator or, worse, trigger a more catastrophic discharge. He had seconds before the field activated. "Vance! Down! Now!" Thorne yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the sudden, low, rhythmic thrumming sound emanating from the facility, the power draw spiking. He didn't wait. He sprinted low and hard across the perimeter, aiming for the utility junction box that Vance was approaching. If he couldn't stop the transmitter, he could disrupt the power source feeding the perimeter defense. As Thorne reached the metal housing of the junction box, he pulled his silenced pistol and fired 3 quick rounds into the heavy-duty lock securing the metal housing. The lock shattered. He ripped the door open, exposing a terrifying nest of thick wires and high-voltage fuses. Simultaneously, the woman in the clearing spoke again, her voice a chilling, synthesized announcement: "Field generation imminent. Upload sequence 5. Vance finally registered the noise and the command. She spun around, seeing the woman in gray and the ominous device she held, which was now vibrating violently. 4. Thorne didn't hesitate. He thrust the barrel of his pistol between 2 of the thickest main power cables inside the box and fired once. The resulting explosion was a contained, blinding flash of blue-white electricity, followed by a shower of sparks and the overwhelming smell of burning ozone. The power feeding the junction box, which managed the facility's external grid, died instantly. The massive steel door of the bunker, which had been slowly retracting, slammed shut with a concussive metallic gong. The woman in the clearing stopped mid-sequence, the humming generator in her hands abruptly falling silent. The milky glow in her eyes faded, and she collapsed inertly onto the asphalt. Vance rushed to Thorne's side, her face pale. "That was too close, Detective. What the hell was that woman?" "She was a fail-safe, a remote-controlled transmitter. An uploaded consciousness wearing its old body like a puppet," Thorne explained, his hands shaking slightly from the near-miss high-voltage discharge. "They didn't just steal mines, they weaponized the empty shells." He examined the sealed steel door. The short in the junction box had locked down the facility's exterior, sealing them out. "The external power is dead, Vance. The perimeter sensors and the motorized door are now offline. But the internal server, Project CHRYSALIS, is still running off its deep geothermal or nuclear backup. The door has a manual emergency lock override." Thorne pointed to a heavily fortified panel beside the main door, usually reserved for fire department or maintenance access. He produced a specialized lockpicking tool, an item he hadn't used since his first year on the force. "We have about 5 minutes before their internal systems reroute power and override the emergency lockdown." "I need silence," Thorne instructed, kneeling before the panel. As Thorne worked on the complex lock, Vance stood guard, her pistol trained on the collapsed woman. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the silence. Not a mechanical thrumming, but a faint, eerie siren rising from deep within the earth, beneath their feet. It was a digital, oscillating warning alarm. Then, the ground began to vibrate, not seismically, but rhythmically, matching the short-long pattern of the chrysalis beacon. "The facility is aware of the breach," Vance whispered, checking the inert woman again. Thorne cursed under his breath as the last pin clicked. He threw the cover open, revealing a reinforced internal manual lock. With a grunt, he turned the massive handle. The main steel door groaned and slid open just enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, the lobby was stark, lit by emergency red lights. A single hallway stretched before them, descending into the concrete depths of the bunker. The air here was hot, dry, and thick with the heavy scent of electronics and something else, something subtly organic, like burned tissue. "The stairs, Vance." "Quick," Thorne ordered, pushing her through the GAP. As they stepped inside, a voice boomed over the internal public address system, not the synthesized drone, but a calm, cultured male voice, laced with authority. "Unauthorized entry detected, Sector 9 Sublevel Alpha. Identity protocol initiated. Detective Elias Thorne, Blackwood PD, you are in violation of multiple national security directives. Cease and desist your intrusion immediately." The voice paused, then added, chillingly, "We have your biosignature, Detective. And we are fully prepared to upload your active memory state into the Chrysalis archive. Do not proceed further. You have been warned." The sound of the commanding, cultured voice, the voice of Project CHRYSALIS's orchestrator, was still reverberating in the humid, electronic air of the red-lit hallway. The threat was chillingly specific: "We are fully prepared to upload your active memory state." "That's the manager, Vance. The one pulling the strings," Thorne hissed, drawing his partner deeper into the bunker. "We don't have time to process that threat. They're running a live feed on us now." The hallway was a steep, concrete ramp, descending rapidly. The emergency red lighting created long, confusing shadows that made it difficult to gauge depth or distance. The air grew steadily hotter and drier, intensifying the smell of burnt electronics. "The stairs end here, Detective. Sublevel 1, Vance reported, pointing her flashlight. The ramp opened into a massive, circular chamber. The walls were lined with heavy, humming equipment racks, secured behind thick, grated metal. This was a power distribution or cooling station, the heart of the facility's infrastructure. The low-frequency pulse, the chrysalis beacon, was now a deep, physical thrumming in their chests. "The main servers must be deeper, where the seismic stability is absolute," Thorne surmised, scanning the room for security. The security system was clearly active. 2 fixed surveillance cameras, mounted high in the corners, rotated slowly, their infrared lenses clicking softly as they searched the room. As Thorne and Vance moved, the cameras followed, locking onto their heat signatures. They're tracking our every move, Thorne. We're being boxed in, Vance said, raising her weapon toward one of the cameras. Don't shoot it. They want us to. A gun discharge down here will tell them exactly where we are and bring down armed response, Thorne cautioned. We need to move tactically, using the racks for cover. They began a dangerous, slow traverse of the circular chamber, darting from one bank of humming machinery to the next. The constant, thrumming low-frequency pulse seemed to be affecting them now, causing a dull ache behind their eyes. Then, the voice returned over the intercom, closer this time, as if the speaker were in the next room. Detective Thorne. Stop. You are compromising the integrity of archived consciousnesses. This is a scientific undertaking of global import. Your involvement is categorized as a catastrophic breach. Tell me about the breach, manager. Tell me about the 4 people you kidnapped and archived. Thorne shouted back, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. A moment of silence, then a sigh, synthesized but carrying an unnerving note of patronizing pity. Those 4 individuals, detective, were deemed unfit. Their upload was a necessary calibration for the system. They are preserved. They are at peace. As the voice spoke, a small, circular panel on a nearby rack slid open. A robotic arm extended, holding a device identical to the high-frequency generator the compromised woman had used, only this one was fixed, mounted, and humming with a deep, deadly power. They're trying to use the field generator to target us in here. Vance yelled. The confined space will amplify the frequency. Thorne realized the immediate danger. The mounted generator was aimed at the center of the room. If it activated, the high-frequency field would envelop them, and their consciousnesses would be ripped from their bodies and uploaded to the servers. The ultimate, permanent erasure. Take cover. Disable that thing. Thorne commanded. Vance provided covering fire, aiming not at the camera but at the power cable trailing from the mounted generator. She fired 3 shots. The cable sparked, but held. The generator was now emitting a faint, high-pitched whine, the charging signal. Thorne, recognizing the layout from Finch's earlier description, spotted an access panel labeled cooling fluid reservoir near the ceiling. If the massive servers were running hot, they needed a coolant system. He vaulted onto the nearest equipment rack, scrambling upward as the whining from the generator intensified. The red emergency lights began to pulse faster, matching the accelerating rhythm of the high-frequency pulse. He reached the access panel and kicked it hard. The panel groaned and gave way. A thick, icy stream of cryogenic coolant fluid immediately began to spray out, instantly vaporizing into a cold fog as it hit the hot equipment racks. The fog quickly enveloped the chamber. The sudden, extreme drop in temperature caused the exposed wiring and hardware, including the mounted generator, to seize up. The generator stopped whining. The emergency lights returned to their steady, ominous red glow. Damage report. Cooling failure detected. Immediate ascension protocol initiated. The voice boomed, now tinged with urgency and alarm. Thorne dropped back down to the floor, breathing heavily. That bought us a minute. The coolant will short out the immediate systems. They're panicking now, Vance. They're running the ultimate failsafe. He pointed to a large, sealed metal blast door at the far end of the chamber, marked with a single, ominous label. Sublevel 2, Archive Core. The Ascension Protocol is their final attempt to secure the data, Vance. They're going to try to upload the entire database before we can destroy it. That's where we'll find the servers, and the manager. Thorne and Vance sprinted towards the blast door, navigating through the cold, artificial fog. They were no longer the hunters, they were now the only threat remaining to Project CHRYSALIS, rushing toward the belly of the beast. The sealed blast door groaned, its heavy mechanisms resisting the sudden temperature drop from the coolant spray. Thorne and Vance, utilizing a set of industrial shears from their tactical bags, forced their way through the narrow gap, they found themselves in a cylindrical pressure tunnel that plunged deeper into the bedrock. The throbbing, low-frequency pulse was deafening here, vibrating not just in their chests but in their bones. "We're at the core's access point," Thorne gasped, fighting against the internal pressure of the low-frequency hum. "This facility is built like a submarine." The tunnel opened into a vast, hemispherical chamber, the final resting place of Project CHRYSALIS. It was an environment of overwhelming sensory overload. Unlike the red-lit utility areas, this chamber was lit by thousands of tiny, intense blue lights embedded in the ceiling and walls, creating a shimmering, ethereal glow. The air was ice-cold, the temperature drastically lowered to protect the core technology. In the center of the room sat the server. It wasn't a rack of computers, it was a single, enormous, metallic sphere, almost 20 feet in diameter, pulsating with the blue light. Fiber optic cables thicker than a man's arm snaked away from the sphere and disappeared into the floor. This was the archive core. The digital prison where the consciousnesses of Marcus Kane and the 3 other victims were stored. Standing before the sphere, bathed in the icy blue light, was a figure. It was the man speaking over the intercom. Dr. Elias Thorne. He was impeccably dressed in a lab coat over a neat suit, his expression calm and utterly detached. He was monitoring a single, sleek terminal mounted on a pedestal. "Detective Elias Thorne." "A regrettable reunion," the man said, turning to face them. His voice was no longer coming from the intercom but was amplified slightly, carrying perfectly in the acoustic space. "Did you truly believe a petty police investigation could uncover a decade of black-budget science?" Elias Thorne felt a cold wave of shock that went deeper than the freezing air. "Eris. It was you. You're the one running this." The manager of Project CHRYSALIS was Thorne's estranged younger brother, a theoretical physicist who had vanished from the academic world 10 years prior. "I am the architect, Elias. I perfected the ether dynamics theory. And I am about to save humanity from the mediocrity of its physical shell," Eris countered, adjusting his cufflink. "And you, Elias, are just an unfortunate variable I must clean up." Vance raised her weapon. "Step away from the console, Dr. Thorne. You are under arrest for 4 counts of kidnapping and murder." Eris smiled, a brittle, academic smirk. "Murder? No, Sergeant. Preservation. The world is too chaotic, too noisy. Here, in the archive core, they are safe. They are eternal. Listen." He pressed a key on the console. A new sound filled the chamber, faint but undeniable, a chorus of whispering, echoing voices, layered over the deep thrum of the chrysalis beacon. They were indistinct, but filled with a melancholic, sustained harmony. "The consciousnesses of the victims, Ascension Protocol, beginning final data compression. Upload initiated," the mechanized voice announced. On Eris's screen, a progress bar began to tick upward rapidly, 5%, 10%, "The final upload is starting, Detective. Soon, the entire archive will be transferred to a permanent, orbital station. Irretrievable. And your physical intervention here will be too late," Eris declared. He was defenseless but utterly confident. Elias lowered his pistol slightly, his focus on his brother. "The constant signal, Eris. The low-frequency pulse. It's too steady. It's what allowed us to find this place. Why is it continuous?" Eris seemed momentarily surprised by the technical question. "The chrysalis beacon is necessary to maintain the integrity of the uploaded minds, Elias. It stabilizes their digital consciousness against quantum decay. Without that constant, localized field, the memories would simply collapse back into static. So, to maintain their digital existence, you need the constant resonance of this server," Thorne concluded. He looked at the massive, pulsating sphere. "It's not a prison, Eris. It's a life support system." Thorne raised his pistol. "Vance, focus on the console. Disable that upload. I'm going for the core." Eris laughed, a high, disturbing sound. "Foolish. You cannot penetrate the core's hull. It's layered with 5 feet of lead-reinforced polymer. It was built to withstand a small-yield nuclear detonation. Thorne ignored him. He ran to the side of the chamber, finding a large, access door marked emergency power shunt. The door was secured by a single, powerful magnetic lock. Vance, I need you to find the kill switch for this magnetic lock on his console. Eris, tell her how to turn it off, or I'll shut down the main power feed and collapse the entire system right now. Thorne demanded, his voice tight with desperation. Eris watched his brother, a look of contempt replacing his smugness. You wouldn't dare. You'd destroy them all. You'd be a murderer, Elias. The upload meter on the screen hit 45%. The whispering voices intensified, becoming a rising, digital shriek. The low-frequency pulse accelerated, shaking the chamber violently. The time for negotiation was over. The air in the archive core was now violently unstable. The rhythmic thrumming of the chrysalis beacon was a destructive vibration, and the high-pitched, layered digital shrieking of the uploaded consciousnesses, the ascension flash in its auditory form, was agonizing. The upload meter on Eris's console flashed 58%. You destroy that core, Elias, and you destroy them, Eris warned, his voice rising in desperation. They are only code now. If the stabilization field fails, they revert to noise. To quantum static. You'll be wiping out 4 lives. Thorne knew Eris was right. Collapsing the system would mean the final, irrevocable death of the 4 missing people. But letting the upload complete meant Eris would win, disappearing with their minds into the blackness of orbit, and likely turning this facility into a death trap for Thorne and Vance. Vance. Find the magnetic lock schematic. Now. Thorne yelled over the din. Vance, fighting the disorientation from the noise and cold, slammed her hands down on the console, ignoring Eris's physical protests. There. Subroutine labeled shield decoupling. It's the lock release for the magnetic door. She typed rapidly, overriding the system prompts. You're killing them. Eris shrieked, lunging at the console. Thorne, without hesitation, delivered a hard, tactical strike to Eris's temple with the butt of his pistol. Eris crumpled instantly, unconscious. Go. Vance shouted, pointing to a glowing green light that had just illuminated above the emergency power shunt door. The lock is open. Thorne scrambled through the narrow, heavy door and found himself in a small, isolated utility chamber. In the center stood a single, massive, exposed lever, the main power cutoff. It was designed to shut down the entire deep-level facility in an emergency. He looked back through the open door at the glowing blue sphere, the archive core. 71% uploaded. Thorne paused, his hand hovering over the cold steel of the lever. He had a choice: pull the lever, destroy Project CHRYSALIS, guarantee Eris's failure, but erase the 4 captive minds. Don't pull the lever, give the victims a chance at digital life, or prison, but allow Eris to succeed and escape. He thought of the metallic, soulless drone on the surface. The empty shells. Eris wasn't preserving lives, he was digitizing and weaponizing their anguish. There was no peace in that whispering shriek. Vance, cover the core. Thorne yelled, before gripping the lever with both hands. With a tremendous grunt, Thorne pulled the massive lever down. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The profound, rhythmic thrumming of the chrysalis beacon stopped. The thousands of blue lights in the chamber died, plunging the core into total darkness. The high-pitched digital shrieking immediately collapsed into a brief, horrifying, static screech, and then, silence. The massive, spherical archive core was now inert, a gigantic, dark tomb in the center of the chamber. System shutdown. Emergency power failed. Total archive collapse. Irrecoverable data loss, the automated voice announced, its tone flat, then died completely. The silence that followed was heavy and final. The conspiracy was neutralized, but the victims were gone. It's over, Detective. We killed the machine, Vance said, lowering her gun, her voice hoarse with sorrow, but Thorne's attention was fixed on Eris, still unconscious on the floor near the inert console. The archive core was destroyed, but the man who built it was still a threat. Thorne moved to handcuff his brother, but as he reached him, a small, blinking red light on a hidden port on Eris's belt caught his eye. It was a small, high-capacity solid-state drive, a memory stick, embedded discreetly into the leather. Thorne quickly wrenched it free. The drive was hot to the touch, and the red light was blinking rapidly, indicating a recent, massive data transfer. Vance. He didn't rely on the core for everything. He created a backdoor. A physical copy, Thorne said, holding up the drive. Eris wasn't just monitoring the upload, he was performing an independent, complete backup of the entire archive core onto this drive before the system collapsed. The voices, the terror, the 4 stolen minds, they weren't static. They were here, on this little flash drive. Eris had planned for failure. Before Thorne could secure the drive, Eris groaned and his eyes fluttered open. He saw the drive in Thorne's hand and the look of triumph was fleeting but absolute. Too late, Elias, Eris whispered, a small stream of blood trickling from his temple. The data is contained. The mind is portable. And the physical world is obsolete. With a surge of strength Thorne hadn't anticipated, Eris snatched a small, metallic object, a spare magnetic lock relay, from his pocket and flung it hard against one of the core's remaining fragile fiber optic cables leading to the now inert console. The cable snapped, sparking violently. The chamber's emergency ventilation systems, now running solely on residual battery power, began to grind loudly, sucking the last of the air out of the room. The facility is going into full atmospheric lockdown. Escape, Elias. Run, and take my brilliant work with you. Eris yelled, the mania returning to his eyes. Thorne secured the drive in his own pocket. We're not leaving you, Eris. Oh, but I'm not staying, brother, Eris said with a final, disturbing smile. He pointed to a small access panel near the floor, too small for a man to enter, and then back at the massive, dark sphere. You saw the ascension flash, Elias. The blue light. The consciousness, it has to go somewhere. Suddenly, the last of the chamber's residual lights flickered and died. Total darkness. And in that final, oppressive blackness, Thorne and Vance heard the sickening, heavy sound of a body hitting the polished, concrete floor. When the emergency headlamp on Vance's belt flickered back on, Eris Thorne was gone. The only sign he had been there was the black suit and lab coat crumpled on the floor beside the massive, dead core. The silence in the archive core was now a vacuum, cold, deep, and heavy. The air was thin, the atmosphere rapidly depleting due to the disabled ventilation system. Thorne pulled Vance away from the area, dragging the unconscious Eris by his suit jacket toward the emergency power shunt door. He's alive. Just concussed, Thorne reported, checking Eris's pulse. But he's gone, Vance. He's not here. Vance, breathing shallowly in the toxic air, stared at the crumpled suit and the empty floor space where Eris's body should have been. The coat and suit, they just dropped. He uploaded himself, didn't he? Like a suicide bomber for the digital age. Thorne looked at the small access panel Eris had pointed to. Finch said the blue light, the ascension flash, is residual bioelectric energy converting to photons when the consciousness transfers. Eris created his own localized field using that magnetic lock relay, snapped the cable, and transferred his consciousness into a waiting receiver. He held up the stolen flash drive. This. He transferred himself into the digital copy of the archive core. He's in here now, a consciousness confined to a portable hard drive, along with his 4 victims. Vance stared at the drive, a small piece of plastic now holding the minds of 5 people, including the mastermind. A portable digital prison. He escaped the facility, but he imprisoned himself. The ultimate control, Thorne agreed, tucking the drive securely inside a protective sleeve in his jacket. He destroyed the core to eliminate the evidence, but he saved his own work and his own mind. He knew we'd have to escape, and he ensured we'd take his creation, his consciousness, with us. The oppressive atmosphere was getting to them. The air was becoming dangerously thin. We need to get out of this chamber, Detective. Now. The facility is in deep lockdown, Vance urged. Coughing, Thorne glanced at the access door leading back to sublevel 1. Eris locked it down, but the shunt door is manually sealed. We're in a pocket of relative safety. The only way out is back the way we came. They dragged the inert body of Elias Thorne, the empty shell of the mastermind, back through the shunt door and into the main sublevel 1 power room. The coolant fog was still heavy, but the air quality was marginally better here due to residual oxygen pockets. We have the evidence, the drive with the digitized consciousnesses, and the body of the orchestrator, Thorne stated, his voice raspy. But we also have a massive military-grade black site, a compromised local police force due to the classified nature of this, and a deep-level government conspiracy about to execute a cleanup. As they started the laborious climb up the concrete ramp toward the surface entrance, the external PA system, somehow utilizing a different emergency channel, crackled to life. Alert. Immediate deployment protocol. Facility status, critical. Neutralization teams are en route. Terminate all unregistered biologicals on site. Project CHRYSALIS security integrity is paramount. The voice was new, cold, disciplined, and unequivocally military. Neutralization teams, Vance repeated, her eyes wide with fear. They're sending the cleanup crew. We're seconds away from a kill order. They reached the top of the ramp and pushed their way through the narrow gap of the main steel door, emerging into the cold, damp clearing. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with a thin, blood-orange light. The clearing was no longer empty. .4 black, unmarked military helicopters were descending rapidly, their rotors kicking up swirling clouds of pine needles and debris. They were armed, and they were aiming for the concrete bunker. Simultaneously, the chain-link fence perimeter was swarming with figures in full tactical gear. The cleanup crew. They're not securing the facility, Vance. They're destroying the evidence. Thorne realized. And we are the only remaining evidence. Thorne threw Eris's body under the cover of the nearest dense pine thicket. We have to split up. I have the drive, I'll draw the attention. Get out of the restricted reserve. Find a way to reach the state police or the FBI, anyone outside of Blackwood jurisdiction. Go. Detective, I can't leave you. You have to. This drive is the proof. If they take us, all those minds, including Eris's, become permanent ghosts in the machine. Go. As the first helicopter settled, dropping figures in black gear who immediately began scanning the tree line, Thorne turned and ran the opposite way, deeper into the dark, silent forest, clutching the portable consciousness of his brother and the 4 victims. The midnight shift had finally come to an end, but the real nightmare, the hunt, had just begun. Thorne plunged into the deep woods, the sound of the approaching military patrol and the deafening thwack of the helicopter blades driving him forward. He moved with the desperate, primal urgency of a cornered animal, using the natural cover of the forest to break the tactical team's line of sight. He ran for nearly 20 minutes before the sounds of pursuit began to fade. The rising sun, now a harsh yellow orb, finally pierced the thinning canopy. He found a secluded, rocky outcrop deep in the forest, far from the restricted zone, and collapsed, gasping for air. His clothes were torn, his body aching, but the small flash drive, the digital prison containing Eris and the 4 victims, was still secured in his inner jacket pocket. Vance was gone. Thorne could only hope she had made it out, the only other living witness to the Archive Corps' horrifying purpose. Thorne pulled out the drive, his hand trembling. It was still warm. The red light was now blinking slowly, rhythmically, the steady, low heartbeat of 5 trapped consciousnesses. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. The neutralization teams would seal off the entire county. He needed to expose the drive's contents to the highest authorities, outside the reach of whatever military faction controlled ether dynamics. He took out his own smartphone, a device he had kept powered down throughout the infiltration, and powered it up. The screen immediately flashed with 5 missed calls from Vance. A huge wave of relief washed over him. She was alive. He ignored the calls and, using a small USB adapter, connected the CHRYSALIS drive to his phone. He accessed the device's main directory. It wasn't encrypted, but it wasn't organized either, just a single, massive file labeled chrysalis_archive.dat. That he quickly located a public, highly secure, government whistleblower server link he'd memorized long ago. He initiated the upload of the massive data file, knowing it would take time, even with a strong 4G signal. As the upload progress bar ticked slowly, Thorne leaned against the cold rock, watching the forest. His brother was on that drive. 4 lives were on that drive. Then, his phone suddenly vibrated with a message notification, not a text, but a system alert from the flash drive itself. It was the X-77 Beta-L6 application. The app that Marcus Kane had opened just before his ascension. The black screen appeared on Thorne's phone, and the stark white text flashed, "Protocol, active." Thorne felt a profound, chilling dread. The drive was not passive evidence, it was an active device. Eris had planned for him to connect it. Before Thorne could yank the drive out, the high-pitched, crystalline ringing began to emanate from his phone, the signature frequency of the electromagnetic generator. And his phone's upload screen froze at 87%. The drive was blocking the outgoing transmission. Then, the final, horrifying message flashed across the black screen, seemingly directed at Thorne himself: "Ascension complete. New host integrity confirmed." Thorne dropped the phone and the drive. His entire body felt cold and heavy. He was the new host. Eris hadn't planned to let him escape. Eris had planned to use him. A moment later, Thorne's phone, still vibrating violently, began to play the sound of whispering voices, the same echoing shriek from the archive core. The digital consciousnesses were attempting to communicate through the phone's speakers, but amidst the layered whispers, a single voice broke through, clear and cold, synthesized but bearing the distinct cadence of his estranged brother. "Eris, welcome home, Elias. The facility is destroyed. The physical world is messy. But the mind is portable. And now, we share a body. I control the code. And I always win the final protocol." Thorne tried to move, to call Vance, to warn anyone. But his fingers twitched with a strange, internal resistance. He raised his hand, and for a terrifying second, he wasn't sure if the command to move his fingers had come from Elias Thorne,